Welcome to the video, everyone. So we've looked already at policing principles from Sir Robert Peel's policing principles. Number 5, it says here, to seek and preserve public favour, not by pandering to public opinion, but by constantly demonstrating absolute impartial service to law in complete independence of policy, without regard to the justice or injustice of the substance of individual laws. Offering of individual service and friendship to all members of the public without regard to their wealth or social standing. Exercise of courtesy and friendly good humour, and by ready offering of individual sacrifice in protecting and preserving life. So this is all about being unbiased and certainly not pandering to public opinion. And I suspect when they're talking about when I'm talking about public opinion, I'm talking about propaganda and mainstream narrative, because that has such a huge influence over over society, basically. So in 1999, this newspaper article was written up, and it's about Stephen Lawrence. And Stephen Lawrence was an immigrant who had arrived in the UK. Apparently, he had been attacked or harmed by the police under false identity or something like that. They hadn't identified him properly, and so he was murdered, we are told. And Stephen Lawrence is one single man, and this one single man, who was an immigrant, changed the entire way of policing so that it is contrary to the Peel principles, and particularly the 5th principle. So on this page there are endless ways in which the police and the government and probably the media created a new cultural sensitivity police training, and it goes all the way down to 70 changes. And this was all so that Stephen Lawrence's parents felt better, so that the newspapers felt better. And it's questionable whether these are actually fair laws to be changed, because what you see here in 2004, just 5 years after these changes to the police culture, there were mass grooming gang uncoverings and discoveries. This was in 2004, and really the grooming gangs really didn't get any highlight until 2014, 2015. So this was buried again for another 10 years after it had already been discovered. And what you find out with this is that actually the police, the chief police, were involved in ensuring that this documentary didn't leave and get seen on TV. And this is where we learn about it on this channel. Anti-racist groups protested, and Colin Cramphorn, the chief constable of West Yorkshire Police, asked for it to be postponed to avoid heightening local tension. Now the thing is, if there's something going on which is criminal, why would you care more about tensions? These issues need to be discussed. It says here, the film was to be screened in the run-up to the local and European elections until leaders of the far-right British National Party hailed it as a party political broadside. Well, they're allowed to do that. It is a political issue. If the police are not policing correctly because one man died, then you don't get to harm and mass genocide or rape masses of children in the process of proving that you're politically correct. So this is about the documentary director Anna Hall. It says the BNP had not seen a single frame of the film before hijacking it. She said the story had been widely misinterpreted. The far right, so this is when they started using the term far right, claimed it as political propaganda, while left-wing pressure groups contended that I was clearly racist. We didn't really talk anymore, but that's interesting about the chief. And so what they're saying is that when there's an issue with regards to political policing, which happened 4 years earlier, or 5 years earlier, political parties are not allowed to discuss that as a concern because they're using it as a political manipulation. So therefore, all the people who have been raped just need to shut up, which is what that what's her name, MP, the Asian MP told people to do on Twitter years ago. So the Supreme Court, it used to be the House of Lords, and it was founded or established in 2009. The creation's interesting. The creation of the Supreme Court for the United Kingdom was proposed in a consultation paper published by the Department of Constitutional Affairs in July 2003. Although the paper noted that there had been no criticism of the then law lords or any indication of an actual bias, it argued that the separation of the judicial functions from the legislative functions should be made explicit. So there wasn't any bias, there wasn't any need to do it, but they did it anyway. And that was in 2009. And that was a proposal in 2004, which was just as the changing of the police culture arose, which I think is interesting. So with the Supreme Court, they've discouraged people from going through the legal system, through the justice system, using different methods to try and obtain justice. And when you look at the reviews of the Ombudsman, they are really poor. So they obviously don't work. And it reminds me of the NHS every winter when they say the NHS is under pressure. People who need to go to the hospital shouldn't go because the NHS is only there for the vulnerable. So this is exactly what's happened to the court system under these changes. which happened just as the policing changed. And it's just so interesting that this one man, just a single man, has made these massive changes since 1999, which have caused or helped enable the mass genocide of British children and British women, and also men as well. And that's through genocide or rape. Genocide or rape is the prosecutor versus Jean-Paul Akayesu, I guess is how it's pronounced. This was Rwanda, and interestingly it was 1998, just before our own policing changed because of Stephen Lawrence. The trial found him guilty of 9 out of 15 counts, charging him with genocide, crimes against humanity and violations of the Geneva Conventions. Ruled that rape and other forms of sexual violence could constitute genocide. It also was the first conviction of an individual for rape as a crime against humanity. And that's because it was mass rape. And what it was one ethnicity mass raping another and being aided and abetted in its doing so. And it's just so interesting that that happened in 1998, and then the UK laws changed, or not the UK laws, but the UK style of policing changed in contradiction with the 5th rule of the policing principles because of one single man who hadn't been in the UK for long. And I'm not saying that that is deserving of being murdered, because it isn't, but it also isn't deserving of changing the entire policing system to a more biased system. And so in my next video we'll go over these changes, because there's 70 of them, and I don't really want to go over all of this in one video. We'll put it into a few. But I'd be interested in what you think, really, about the changes of about the 1990s, really, and all these changes with more biased policing, and September the 2nd, 1998, where they did find that one ethnicity mass raping another ethnicity was genocide or rape, and whether you think that have that court case having gone through, was this the correct procedure to take for the UK because of this one single man who had only been living in the UK for a short period of time? And do you think it was part of a greater plan? Were they just looking for a particular person to use to change laws, and it was just Stephen Lawrence? Some people believe in false flags, which is an opinion which deserves discussion, because it shouldn't be put aside. Otherwise it could be discrimination. And that may or may not have been the case. It's something to debate, at least. So I'll leave it there. But I just thought that this was particularly interesting. It's something that I keep using in my own court cases, because it does identify the issues with policing today, especially when the policing has become so politically correct. But it's not just police anymore, it's the NHS, so I'll show you the NHS issues in another video as well. So I'll leave it there. Thanks a lot. Bye.